Howdy everyone and welcome to the Esports channel, and today we're tackling a big question. What is esports? It is one of the biggest forms of electronic media today, and every year it gets bigger and bigger, making more and more money along the way. But again, we have to come back to the question, what is esports? Well, today we hope to give you the answer to that question by giving you a brief history of the field, how it got to be as big as it is today, and where it's going in the future.
And G2 ripped through the hearts of Team Liquid and North American fans as they secure themselves.
Esports, at its most basic level, is a competition using the medium of video games between two or more players, usually taking place at a tournament between individuals or teams of players. The most popular genres for the games of esports are multiplayer online battle arenas, or MOBAs, which are games like League of Legends. You've also got your first-person shooter games like Call of Duty and Halo, fighting games like Street Fighter, digital card games like Hearthstone, battle royale games like Fortnite, and real-time strategy games like StarCraft. And of course, these are just the big popular ones. Now, esports, however, can be so much more than that as well, and some esports can even be one person playing a game seen in titles like Farming Simulator, and groups of teams playing against enemy AI, not even against each other, such as with World of Warcraft's Mythic Dungeon International, which has players trying to win a game as skillfully or as quickly as possible, and then comparing scores to other players playing the same game at the end. The breadth of esports is far and wide and encompasses all kinds of games, but they're all video games in the end, putting the word electronic in electronic sports. Now, before the year 2000, most esports tournaments were amateur-level affairs that were mostly fought for pride and usually bragging rights. However, with the rise of streaming and streaming platforms, esports has quickly become a global powerhouse, as viewers from all over the world have become able to watch their favorite games be played by the best players of those games in the world at the same time at the push of a button. No longer do we have to dig through backwater web pages or look for dusty old VHS tapes, if you guys even remember what those are, to watch old, out-of-focus match footage. The world of competitive gaming is now at the world's fingertips, current and live with the players, turning every single event into something anyone can participate in. In 2019, it is estimated that the total audience of esports will grow to 454 million viewers, and that revenue will increase to over $1 billion. Countries like South Korea have several established esports organizations that have been licensing pro gamers as early as the early aughts, the early 2000s. Official recognition of esports in other countries has been a little bit slower, unfortunately, despite most major esports events taking place in places such as North America, Europe, and China. Funnily enough, the country probably most associated with gaming in most people's minds, Japan, has an extremely small esports scene due to the country's extremely strict gambling laws, which unfortunately include professional gaming tournaments, which obviously is far from the case, though getting into gambling is a whole nother discussion. Now, the earliest known video game competition took place in 1972 that we have recorded at the Stanford University for the game Space War. Students were competing for the highest score, with the grand prize, the big kahuna, being a 1-year-long subscription to the Rolling Stones magazine, which ain't that bad considering it was 1972. In 1980, Atari held the Space Invaders Championship, which was the earliest large-scale video game competition with over 10,000 players competing, with the winner being one Rebecca Heinemann, a professional video game designer and programmer.
It's my turn. I start playing, and I'm so bored playing this game, playing Space Invaders. Yeah, I'm bored. I was talking with the judge because I had nothing else better to do. And I was like, oh yeah, I just lost the base. Okay, play. Like an hour or two go by. Oh, I lost on the base. Yeah, whatever. Base, play. What's my score? And he goes like, oh yeah, you got like 83,600 points. And of course, my reply was, is that good? Well, it turns out that it was more than double the second place player. So they announced that I was the winner, and I was like, you're kidding me. And I saw Tom just jumping up and down like his pants were on fire, all happy for me. And like, I'm going to New York for the finals? Oh,
That same year, Walter Day founded a company called Twin Galaxies, a high-score record-keeping organization which would go on to help promote video games and publicize its own catalog of high scores through the Guinness World Book of Records. And in 1983, Twin Galaxies founded the United States National Video Game Team. The team then ran the Video Game Masters tournament for Guinness World Records and sponsored the North American Video Game Challenge tournament. When Street Fighter II released in 1991, it was the first game to truly popularize direct head-to-head competition between two players, as before the competitions were largely focused on a single player attempting to get a high score, and then other players in the tournament competing against that high score. Street Fighter changed all of this and birthed a new genre of competitive video game competition. This type of head-to-head competition paved the way for more multiplayer events and deathmatch type games made popular over a decade later. And still, we can see this type of genre being utilized aggressively today, with more and more fighting games such as Mortal Kombat coming out earlier this year. Now, fan-run tournaments like Battle by the Bay would eventually grow into the EVO World Championship Series, the Super Bowl of fighting games, those head-to-head games we were talking about. But it wasn't just fan-made grassroots tournaments that were taking hold. Even back then, developers were starting to get involved. One example is the Nintendo World Championships held in 1990 that toured the United States and held its finals at Universal Studios Hollywood in California. This was a year after The Wizard, starring Fred Savage, that brought the concept of video game tournaments to more of a mainstream audience that would end up following a similar format in real life.
Jimmy! He's a finalist! Why didn't you tell me? He's a finalist! What? My son's a finalist. Jimmy! Watch the mushrooms!
In 1994, Nintendo would then go on to hold a second World Championship event, this time focusing on titles for the Super Nintendo. In the late 90s, the rise of the internet would lead to the explosive growth for PC-focused titles, and saw games like Counter-Strike, which I played, StarCraft, which I also played, Quake, which I also played, and Warcraft, which I did not play, gain huge player bases. These games are just examples of some of the massive communities that started to be developed thanks to the internet that allowed constant interconnectivity. During the 2010s, however, thanks to streaming sites like Twitch, YouTube, Panda, and Douyu, esports saw huge growth in viewership instead of just players, and also prize money. The number of major tournaments had skyrocketed from about 10 in the year 2000 to 260 by 2010. Many successful tournament series were founded during this time, including the World Cyber Games, the Intel Extreme Masters, and Major League Gaming. Esports events started getting televised in different countries during this time as well, but very sporadically in countries outside of South Korea, which frequently broadcast major tournaments for games like StarCraft and Warcraft on television.
This, of course, did involve a whole lot of fantastic Counter-Strike as well. What were the very best plays? That's one of the questions I'm sure you're wondering.
Now, in more recent times, developers have fully embraced esports as an aspect of their titles, and more often is fully representative of their goals for the competitive side of their titles. All kinds of developers from Nintendo, Capcom, Blizzard, Riot Games, Namco Bandai, and more all devote entire organizations of their company to the competitive aspects of their respective games.
There it is. How did you say this? Oh no! You are kidding me!
In 2015, the Esports Arena was opened in Santa Ana, California, an arena solely dedicated to esports, with another similar location opening in 2018 at the Luxor in Las Vegas, Nevada, called the HyperX Esports Arena Las Vegas. Now, despite all of this expansive growth, getting esports recognized as an officially recognized sporting event has still been an uphill battle. Many people still refuse to qualify esports as an actual sport because of its supposed lack of physical activity, when in reality, pro esports players maintain high levels of careful planning, precise timing, and skillful execution in their respective games, just as much as more traditional sports. Now, it isn't just those outside esports that have had trouble classifying esports as their own sport, as different communities within certain games themselves see them as separate to others. Efforts have been made to try and push esports as a sport even further. In 2013, Canadian League of Legends player Danny Shifter Lee became the first pro gamer to receive an American P1A visa, a category specifically designated for internationally recognized athletes. In 2014, Turkey's Ministry of Youth and Sports started issuing esports players licenses to players certified as professionals. In 2016, the French government started working on a project to regulate and recognize esports. The Games and Amusements Board of the Philippines have also started issuing athletic licenses to Filipino esports players who are vouched for by a professional esports team in July of 2017. And that's just a few examples. Many countries have been changing their attitude toward esports as a whole. The United States, however, is still one of the slower countries to adapt to the change in times and allow looser regulations allowing esports players. Now, one avenue that is currently being explored is having esports recognized by the International Olympic Committee. In 2017, the committee officially recognized the growing popularity of esports and acknowledged that players at the highest level of esports go through just as much training, mental, and physical preparation as athletes of more traditional sports. Unfortunately, however, the committee has a bit of a problem with games focused on violence and death, which is a bit ironic considering that many of the sports featured in the Olympics themselves started out as actual violent combat, harkening back to the ancient Greek Olympics between two folks. Now, it seems more likely that we're going to be seeing titles like FIFA or NBA 2K at the Olympics before we get shooters like Overwatch or Call of Duty. Despite this, however, esports have started to show up adjacent to Olympic events, with tournaments being held for games in conjunction with major Olympic events like the 2016 Summer Olympics and the 2018 Winter Olympics. In fact, the Tokyo Summer Olympics in 2020 are planning to have a much bigger esports component to represent Japan's integral part in the games industry. And lawmakers are even starting to look into ways to loosen the country's very, very strict anti-gambling laws to not include professional esports tournaments. Here's hoping that we can actually get to see that by 2020. Regardless, we here hope that this was an enlightening experience for you. Esports has no place to go but up, as more and more tournaments, more and more games, more and more interest keeps on coming every single month, every single year in the esports field. And as it is that interest that keeps growing, we at the Esports channel will be here to bring you all of the latest in esports and gaming news. My name is Dom, thanks for watching, and GG.